All right. Looks like we are live. How's everyone doing? Uh, I'm going to go ahead and switch over. Suspense intensifies. I'm going to keep this a little bit light. I'm going to look at chat. I'm going to try and see what you guys have to say. But today I'm here to talk to you about collaborating in large projects. Uh, First, I'm going to kind of go over what my experience has been, and I'm going to kind of interject three stories into this entire process as I give you resources, as I give you guys some notes. So it's definitely going to be a lot more conversational. I'd love to hear from you guys in the chat. I will be, yes, look at the Andra images. The entire presentation is full of them. So I'm going to keep this conversational. I'm going to pretend to be a streamer. That's the way I'm going to do it. But first, let's talk a little bit about myself. My name is Jason Hunter. Professionally, I'm a director of engineering for Red Ventures. Feel free to look us up. We are hiring. Hint, hint. No. You can find me on GitHub at HunterJM. Twitter, the same. But as far as Home Assistant is concerned, I've been using Home Assistant for about the past 2.5 years, contributing just as long. Started with the TensorFlow object detection integration, most recently the Xbox integration, and have worked on OnVIF as well as a lot of the core components like the core stream and media source platforms as well. So first, let's talk a little bit about Home Assistant. I pulled these back in November when I was first putting this slide together, but the way that we've grown over the course uh, of the years is just fantastic. In 24 weeks this year, including Hacktoberfest, we've merged almost 7,500 PRs, uh, and it's just amazing at how fast this has grown. There's been a massive amount of contribution activity this year, and it's grown since 2014. We've got over 2,200 contributors to the project. The project's seen continuous growth over the past 6 years. The core repo itself has over 1 million lines of code. So on average, the main GitHub repo sees over 16,000 visits per day from over 5,000 people. Entering into a project this large can be overwhelming and frankly intimidating. I don't have any business being here. I'm not skilled enough. I haven't a clue where to start. Our internal monologue can sometimes haunt us. Imposter syndrome is a psychological pattern in which an individual doubts their skills, talents, or accomplishments and has a persistent internalized fear of being exposed as a fraud. Doubt, fear, fraud. So here's where I'm going to interject kind of one of my own personal stories here. The holidays are right around the corner, and this year I bought a new artificial Christmas tree. It was my first one after starting down my home automation journey. Of course, I wanted a tree that I could potentially add to Home Assistant, but I'm lazy. I don't want to string my own RGB lights every year. Fortunately, I found a great deal on this Twinkly brand tree, which had app-controlled LEDs and was actually cheaper than a lot of the trees at the big box stores. After doing a little bit of Googling, I found that its communication protocol is also local, and better yet, there was already a Python library that implemented it. So I pulled the trigger, I bought it, and I was ready to build an integration for it. But after a quick search on GitHub, I realized there was already a pull request open for it. That's even better, especially since I'm lazy. So the first thing I did was I assigned the pull request to myself. It already had a contributor give an initial review. The author had already addressed some comments. So I excitedly left a comment letting the author know that, hey, I just purchased this tree and I'd love to help push it over the finish line in order to get it in before Christmas, which it's going to be in this today's release. So I took a look at the pull request, excitedly commented. There's only 5 things that I wanted the author to change after my initial review. Overall, I thought, hey, this pull request looks pretty good. A good number of my suggestions could easily be applied to a future pull request. The author addressed all my comments on the same day that I got the tree, so I broke the no decorating before Thanksgiving rule, which I personally hold true to, and went ahead and set it up. Pulled up my development environment, pulled down his pull request, gave it a whirl. There was a little import issue, so I went back to the pull request and added one more comment, which was again quickly resolved. So after I tested it again, I happily smashed that merge button. A couple of hours later, I checked my email and I saw that Martin had left a review on the pull request. I click through to GitHub and I scroll and continue to scroll and continue to scroll. There were 30 additional review comments that Martin had asked the author to address in a new pull request. 30. So I quickly hop over to Discord and send Martin this message. And this was his reply. The moral of the story is that even with over 15 years of professional development experience, authorship of multiple Home Assistant integrations and core components, and merge privileges on the core repo, I still feel the impact of imposter syndrome from time to time. The good news, our community is awesome, our core developers are always willing to lend a hand, and our culture is inviting and, maybe most importantly, patient. Keeping that in mind and witnessing it firsthand should help remove the mental block that we impose on ourselves. So today I'm here to talk about the tools that are available to you in order to get started. And I'm going to start kind of basic around just initial contributions and collaboration, and then go into collaborating on bigger and broader initiatives. The first place that we should start is the developer doc site. The team works hard to keep it up to date with the latest standards and examples to help make your first integration a success. Starting with architecture will give you the foundation you need for the terminology and system design. The core and backend sections will walk you through setting up your development environment, style guidelines, testing, and submitting your work. It will also take you step by step in creating a new integration and provides handy development checklists to help ensure that your pull request reviews go smoothly. If front end is more your style, the front end section of the docs will guide you through the same architecture and setup steps, along with additional documentation around extending the front end and developing for the Lovelace UI. No matter what you want to do, I encourage you to read all of the content available on this doc site because it'll help give much needed context, and I guarantee you'll find yourself referencing it many times over and over again. I still do after 2 years. After the developer documentation, Discord's going to be your second best friend. Take note of the development section here on the left-hand side. It contains channels for you to ask all of your questions. The standard question etiquette applies to the dev channel as well. Utilize the search functionality in Discord to see if your question has already been asked and answered. Just ask your question. Don't ask to ask a question. Any additional context is helpful, including steps that you've already attempted to resolve your problem. Don't post code walls. Upload it to Gist or Pastebin and send us a link. Don't mention people directly. Somebody's going to be around to help you shortly. Try to keep all conversations out of DMs and in the dev channels, because that's actually going to help the next person who comes along. And if an answer was helpful in clarifying your understanding, consider opening a pull request on the developer doc site in order to help the next person as they come along as well. And yes, it is light mode for both. I hate reading slides and presentations on projectors with dark mode. It's just harder to read through. So the next and often best resource available to you is the code itself. After reading through the developer documentation and the code is the next best thing to look at. Is there already an integration that's similar to what you're trying to build? How exactly do Lovelace cards get built? Familiarizing yourself with the code base early and bumping that up against the documentation and Discord resources is a surefire way to get yourself off the ground. But remember, there's over 1 million lines of code in this repo. It's very large and very old. There are still things hanging around from years ago that haven't been updated according to the latest coding standards. Not all integrations are created equal, as you can learn later today if you join me on the main stage for my other talk, which shares that same name. From a development perspective, reviewing recent merged pull requests with new integration label can help you separate the wheat from the chaff there. And yes, do use the scaffolding scripts where possible. So now you've read the documentation, you found an integration that's similar to yours, and you've had all of your initial questions answered in Discord. You're ready to start coding, right? Well, before booting up your IDE of choice, I encourage you to take one more step and plan out your work. Fact of life number 5832. Large changes are hard to review and take a lot of time. So that brings me to this next story that I have for you, and this is the story of the Xbox integration. Xbox Media Player support was actually the very first thing that I did for Home Assistant back in early 2018. It 100% did not meet the code quality requirements to be contributed back to core, but it was always on the back of my mind to get around to it soon, trademark. Soon actually came in October this year when, in anticipation of launching the next gen console, Microsoft released a new mobile app. And poking around that mobile app, I realized there's a new communication protocol that they also released to communicate with the Xbox, their Smart Glass v3 protocol. I got to work modifying the Open Xbox client, adding support for the new protocol, and by the time I was done, there was so much that could be exposed to Home Assistant, but I knew from experience that opening a single massive PR would take forever to get reviewed and merged. And this is exactly what happened to me in the past with the Stream integration. So this is my pull request that I opened. The very first thing that I added was just the OAuth 2 setup, which I used the scaffolding script for, and then a basic media player integration. But as you can see down below, I say subsequent pull requests will add support for Media Browser to be able to browse and launch installed applications, Media Source to be able to browse and view your game clips and screenshots inside of the Media Browser, a remote integration to be able to send controller button and text input to the console, and then presence sensors to replace the old Xbox Live integration, which used a third-party service instead of talking to the Xbox Live service directly, in order to add sensors to Home Assistant for friend statuses. So what ended up happening is by breaking this feature down into 5 separate feature pull requests, it allowed for a very easy and collaborative code review process. The stars aligned, and because of the timing on when I first submitted my first pull request, it was right after we had cut beta. I had a full 3 weeks in order to get these features out, and I was able to get all 5 features and 3 bug fixes merged in time to be all released together for 0.1.17. And if I were to submit this as a single massive pull request, it's very unlikely that it would have been picked up and reviewed. To be clear, it's by no means a guarantee, and your mileage may vary. Most reviews are done on volunteer time, and like the Twinkly story from earlier, can depend on if someone else shares your need. Major integrations from well-known brands with a wide reach may receive more attention than an integration with your municipal garbage pickup company. So, now you've read the documentation, you found an integration that's similar to yours, you've had all your initial questions answered in Discord, you've planned your work, and your code complete on your MVP. Or you found an existing bug and you fixed it in an existing integration. Or you've clarified a part of the integration's documentation that was confusing when you initially set it up. All 3 of these things are valuable. One's not greater than the other, but it's time to open your first pull request. So let's walk through what that looks like. Upon opening your first pull request, you're going to be greeted with this message. The contributor license agreement's there for you to certify that your contribution is qualified to be submitted under the Apache 2.0 open source license, and that you consent to the information you submit with it is public record. Very easy to just click through and accept the CLA, and you only have to do it once. You don't have to do it for every contribution that you have. The next thing to keep an eye out for as you submit a pull request is the various checks that'll run against your pull request. If you follow the developer documentation and set up the pre-commit hooks, most of these should pass before you even get around to opening the pull request. But for the sake of time, not all checks are going to be run locally. Clicking on details next to a failed check should give you all the information that you need to fix it. The next step is addressing pull request comments. You're going to get many different types of review comments. They can vary from stylistic, others could be just organizational, how you organize your code. Some will just be questions, and others could require a refactor in order to address fully. As the author and hopefully a future maintainer of the code, I encourage you to treat code reviews as a conversation. If there's a specific reason for doing something a certain way, make it clear uh, and work with the reviewer to come up with a mutually agreeable solution instead of just getting discouraged and letting the pull request die out. I've seen that happen far too many times in multiple projects, not just Home Assistant, where a pull request will be opened and then abandoned. That being said, pick your battles. Don't argue over stylistic or organizational comments. They exist mostly to help ensure as much consistency as possible across the code base, and honestly, they don't really matter in the grand scheme of things. A pull request is not the right avenue to have a tabs versus spaces debate. It's spaces, by the way. All right, so congratulations. You've addressed all the comments, you've made it through the review, it's been approved and merged. The sense of accomplishment you're going to feel at this point is amazing. Feel free to share it on social media or in the forums. The community is awesome. The appreciation you'll receive makes you feel all that much better. And I do see a lot of people commenting in the chat as well. I really appreciate that, bringing up points that I don't have in my conversation, but uh, are absolutely valid. Integrations, as you're submitting one, limit it to one platform when doing a new integration PR. And yes, I 100% agree. Documentation pull requests are an awesome place to start if you're new and getting used to the Git process, as well as bug fix pull requests. And then, as Aaron said, don't take pull request comments personally. It's very easy to do, especially when imposter syndrome's at play. Use it as a learning opportunity. Uh, and again, and that's why I say treat it as a conversation. Like, uh, post a reply, if there's a question, say, hey, why should I do X instead of Y? Or why should I do X instead of Z? And Robert, no, I'm sorry, you're wrong. It is absolutely spaces. So this kind of gets me into the last section of my talk, and I'm only 15 minutes in, so we've got plenty of time to go through here. Now you're hooked on Home Assistant. You want to make a larger impact. You see room for improvement, or you have an idea that is outside of the scope of a single integration. How do we approach collaboration across the project? Right now I've talked about you personally having a want or a desire or a need that fits your use case. And Home Assistant's great in the way that we break up the integration so that we can have code owners and control over small sections. But some things span like the entire ecosystem. So how do we approach collaboration across the project? For large, widespread decisions like changing supported Python versions, install methods, or even integration discovery requirements, uh, we had adopted an architecture decision record repo and format, which live in the architecture repo of Home Assistant. An architecture decision record, or ADR, contains 5 simple sections. The status, whether it was proposed, accepted, or rejected. Context, why is this a problem that needs to be solved? A proposal, detail the way that the problem can be solved, or more than one way that a problem can be solved. Decision, which of those proposals was selected, and then consequences. And this is probably the most important part. What side effects will this decision have on the project or community, right? And I think as you're coming up with an ADR or a proposal in order to submit to this repo, thinking through the consequences is one of the most important things that we can do. Yes, it's going to solve a problem in one way, but what are unintended side effects or what are things that could happen otherwise? So discovery requires unique ID is one that I just pulled as an example. Chris opened this up as a pull request in the architecture decision repo. And time is given for anybody with an opinion in order to be able to comment on it. It's a living document until all comments have been addressed and a decision's been made, at which point it's merged, which provides a record of why we've made some of the decisions that we have in the past. So for this one, discovery requires a unique ID. The reason that it's added, right, around the context is that uh, right now we have a way to dismiss integrations, but if they don't have a unique ID when you dismiss them, they come back up the next time that you restart Home Assistant. And so this kind of adds a way in order for us to be able to have a better UX, which allows people to dismiss things. Sometimes, however, things happen more organically than opening up ADRs. And that was the case when I saw some chatter about work being done on a media browser. And Bram talked about this in the keynote this morning. So the work was being done on the media browser component for the front end media player. Zach decided to post it in Discord and said, "Hey, if you want to work on media browser, Bram and I finished the front end." Having worked a lot on camera integrations with Home Assistant in the past, my mind immediately jumped to, "Hey, it'd be cool to be able to watch my camera recordings inside of Home Assistant." Uh, so the idea got a lot of comments in Discord and was even linked to a month of WTH post where someone had actually posted, "Hey, why can't I do this?" Because it garnered so much interest, I went ahead and I put together a proof of concept and shared it with everyone in the channel. Obviously, between 824 and 826, there's a lot of different messages that are going on here. Now, this was even less polished than the MVP that I recommended earlier when I was preaching break down your work in your pull requests. This was just a simple draft pull request. It was functioning, but very, very, very ugly. Like the code was awful. Perhaps most importantly, though, it worked, and I included a GIF. So this is just a pre-recorded from my garage camera and browsing locally uh, on my Home Assistant device. So that proof of concept with a quick GIF of it in action is what got me added to a group chat on Discord with Paulus, Bram, Zach, and eventually Tobias, where over the course of the next few weeks, we worked together integrating the current media browser work that Bram and Zach had already spent a lot of time on with my proof of concept and building out new core functionality in the media source integration that Tobias was able to implement for Netatmo, which Bram also mentioned earlier in the keynote. So working with this rockstar group of people who've all had awesome ideas was probably one of the best experiences that I've had working with Home Assistant. All it took was a good idea, a little bit of work, and a spark. And that's all I've got. We've got 10 minutes left. I know that there's Q&A after this, but I am happy to spend the rest of this time uh, talking to chat and seeing if you guys have any questions you want. Nope. Sorry, Ben. Graphical doesn't sound like Jaffical. So I see one question here. Have the team ever thought about mentorship programs? I think it's a little difficult because it's open source. We're all geographically located in different areas. Um, there's not really a lot of room for formal mentorship, but Discord, honestly, I think is the best community that we have. Um, I have seen so many questions and answers, and even just general chatter in the devs channel that kind of helps build some of that. And our community is so great. Like, if you post a question, or basically, there's no such thing as a stupid question, right? Uh, and that's the way that we all treat it. If you're trying to learn, if you're trying to get better, someone will be there in order to help you and hold your hand along the way. Any easy tips for new devs to approach testing? With looking at older integrations, you sometimes get stuck in not up to par code. Yeah, I agree with that as well. Testing is probably one of my least favorite uh, parts of Home Assistant and where I get the most comments in my pull requests. Sometimes I'm lazy and I don't add tests. Other times I do. Um, I think Robin, who is in here, Robert Svensson, does a great job managing tests on uh, the Unify integration as well as his Access integration. So a lot of times, what I'll do is I'll search specific people who are code owners of things and look at the work that they do. That's just something that I've done in the past. Um, the other thing to do is you can in your local dev environment go ahead and run tests for the entire project. It will take a while, but in the output you should see which integrations have good test coverage. And those integrations that have good test coverage are the ones that are likely continuing to be up to date. Uh, and then if you find an integration similar to yours that has good test coverage, it's always better to borrow, in my opinion, than try and reinvent everything. Somebody said something about rebasing. Let me switch over to the developer documentation. Um, this is all in catching up with reality here. And this is why I recommend reading the dev documentation in its entirety. Basically, what happens in Git is if you create a branch off of dev and you work on something for 2 weeks, we've got over 2,000 people contributing back to Home Assistant. That means that we're going to have merged about 100 things by the time that your pull request is ready to get up. And it's possible that someone else has stepped on your toes during that time. The good thing is when we merge everything, we just do a squash merge, which means even if you force push to your branch, the history is you modifying the history is not an issue because we don't take your history and merge it back into dev. We just squash everything into a single commit when it gets merged back into dev. And so that's where rebasing comes into play. There's instructions here on the developer site as well. Ben Wu, explain a little bit more about the PR process. What is it, and why is it called a pull request? It's called a pull request because Git is a distributed system. So when you clone down a repo, that is your repository, and you've created a fork of it. And then you commit code to your repo that's still in your fork. And a pull request is saying, hey, owner of Home Assistant, will you pull my changes back into the core repo so that it can be released as part of the official Home Assistant release? So that's kind of the reasoning behind pull request. Obviously, before we say, yeah, we'll take your changes, we're going to want to make sure that it meets like code quality, style guidelines, and kind of just the standards of the core Home Assistant repo. Martin does a great job at this, really to help ensure consistency across the project. Um, with a project as large as Home Assistant is, it's really important to have all of our code look similar or the same and consistent. That way you can easily poke around into different places and understand what's going on. Uh, and so that's really the wrap for pull request. What do I run Home Assistant on? I run it on an Intel NUC i5. Why is Hacks not in core? I think the main reason for Hacks being a separate entity is because there are people who don't necessarily want to go through um, the process of getting code reviewed or want to be able to release something on a faster dev cycle. I personally have used Hacks as a distribution method for beta testers for an integration that I would want to put back in core in the future. But also we kind of have rules in core to help ensure the stability of the system in general, like no web scraping is allowed because those integrations break a lot. Uh, and so if someone in Hacks wants to, or the only way to get a certain integration done is by having it do web scraping, then Hacks is a distribution method that kind of allows that. The rules are a lot looser. And I am so far behind on the chat now, so I'm going to scroll down a little bit. I use Home Assistant like Hass.io. When I start to develop, will I need a separate dev system, and how do these two integrate? So yeah, I think the easiest way to set up your development environment is using the Visual Studio Code and Dev Container system. That's what I do personally. It just runs on your normal desktop, completely separate from your production Home Assistant installation, and then it's its own set of configuration, integrations, and installations as well. So I only enable the things that I'm currently working on inside of that system. The reason I recommend using the dev container in Visual Studio Code is because pre-built in, you've got a debugger as well. And by the way, if you don't have any experiences with interactive debuggers, it's about 1,000 times more efficient than putting print statements in your code. And I recommend that you Google and research how to use one. All right, and so I am a minute and a half out of time, or close to time, so I think that will cover it. I appreciate everyone's time. Enjoy the rest of the conference. And also, don't forget to catch me later on the main stage for Not All Integrations Are Created Equal. Thanks, everybody.